My mother slid the envelope across the table like she was handing over a napkin. "One for Isadora," she said, smiling. "Nothing for Serafina. She understands." I didn't. Not when my sister was handed 500,000 acres of ranch land luxury estates and a golden watch engraved with our family crest. Not when the room erupted in applause and I was still sitting there empty-handed. Not when my father patted Isadora's back and said, "You earned it. You're the legacy," and turned to me with a look that said, "You were never meant to inherit anything." I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I could only stare at the tablecloth while my future was signed away in silence. And just as I was about to stand and leave, the lawyer coffeeed. "There is one more document," he said. He pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, yellowed, with my name in my grandfather's handwriting. "It's from your grandfather," the lawyer continued. "He instructed me to read it. Only after the rest of the will was settled." They froze. My parents, my sister, the room. And in that moment, everything they tried to bury was about to be unearthed. "Hi, I'm Serafina Hawthorne. They gave my sister the whole world and left me with nothing but a whisper from the dead. But that whisper rewrote everything." Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, "listening" in the comments, or tell me where you're from. And if this kind of story means something to you, please hit subscribe, because no one should ever have to fight alone for what was already theirs. Thank you. And now, here's my story. They say Montana never forgets your footsteps. As I stepped onto the familiar red dirt path leading to the Hawthorne Ranch, I felt the land remember me and judge me all the same. The wind tugged at my coat, and the old wind chime hanging by the porch let out a hollow clatter. It used to sound like summer. Now it just sounded like loss. I was 25, a designer, a disappointment, the youngest Hawthorne daughter back from New York. Not for a holiday, not for forgiveness, but for duty. My grandfather, Theodore Hawthorne, the only person who ever saw me for more than who I wasn't, had passed away a year ago. And today, we were here to read his will. The family had gathered in the old living room, golden lights spilling through the high windows, casting long shadows on the oak-paneled walls. I sat at the far end of the room, just outside the reach of the fireplace. My mother, Margaret, was seated upright in her ivory coat, looking polished and poised as always, a porcelain mask with no trace of warmth. My father, Charles, sat beside her, his jaw clenched in permanent appraisal. And then there was Isadora, my sister, the golden girl, with perfect posture, perfect achievements, and perfectly timed smiles. She looked like she belonged here. Lawson, our family attorney, cleared his throat. He was gray now, older, maybe more tired than the last time I saw him. Theodore Hawthorne leaves the entire ranch land structure's livestock and all related assets to his granddaughter, Isadora Hawthorne. There it was, the crown jewel. 500,000 acres of legacy signed, sealed, and delivered to the favorite. I stared down at the knot in the oak table. My pulse pounded behind my ribs, but I gave nothing away. I had learned how not to react. That was my only inheritance, or so I thought. Lawson continued, but I barely heard the words. Then came my mother's voice. Controlled, soft and barbed. "Serafina," she said, turning toward me with a look I remembered from every family dinner I ever endured. "You chose your path, and it wasn't this one. You won't be receiving anything." There was no surprise in her tone. She spoke as if it had already been decided long ago. Perhaps it had. The room was silent. Only the wind outside and the soft creak of the rocking chair I used to nap in as a child. Then, as Lawson prepared to close the folder, he paused. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a sealed envelope from his leather briefcase. It was pale brown, the flap still bearing a wax seal. My breath hitched when I saw the handwriting strong, deliberate cursive. It was my grandfather's. To be opened only in the presence of the full family, Lawson read. My mother's lips parted, then shut. The blood drained from her cheeks. My father shifted in his seat and looked away. Isadora's face tightened, as if she tasted something bitter. Lawson placed the envelope gently on the table between us, like it was something alive. No one spoke. The air changed. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was a current, charging waiting. Whatever I'd been left out of was no longer a closed door. It had become a question. And I was ready to demand an answer. It was dusk when I stood at the edge of the woodshed-turned house my grandfather had called home. The wind chime above the door didn't sing. This time, it clanged once, then fell quiet. The white paint on the door was cracked. The porch boards groaned under my boots. And yet, the moment I knocked, I felt like a trespasser. The door opened. Eleanor Hawthorne, my grandmother, stood in the frame. She didn't smile. Her silver hair was pulled tight, and her voice was steel. "So, you finally decided to come," she said. The words cut deep. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her I had tried, but she turned and walked inside. The house smelled of cedar and dried lavender. I remembered playing jacks on that rug, the one still fraying at the edges. But now it just looked like a museum of a life I was no longer part of. "I called," I said. "I wrote. After I left New York, I tried." "You didn't," she interrupted. "Not once. Theodore died thinking you'd forgotten him." My knees buckled. "That's not true." "Then explain this." She handed me an old rotary phone. Its cord tangled, its casing cracked. But in the call log, yes, it was digitalized, I saw the number. Dozens of missed calls, voice messages, but the number wasn't mine. "It's not me," I whispered. "That's not my phone number." Grandmother's eyes narrowed. "Your parents gave this to him, said it was yours. Every day he left a message. Every day he waited for you to call back." I felt the floor shift beneath me. My heart was somewhere in my throat. She wasn't done. "March, you came by, didn't you? You knocked on the door." "I did. Isadora told me nobody was home. We were all here, celebrating my birthday." I staggered back into a chair, and then came the cruelest blow. "The funeral," she said. "You weren't there." I choked out. "I got the notice. 9 a.m. at St. Bridget's." "No," she said quietly. "It was at noon." A cold, suffocating silence fell. I saw myself again, sitting alone in that empty church pew, clutching flowers I'd bought on instinct. I thought I had missed the family. I thought they had moved on without me. Now I realized I was never invited to begin with. She opened a drawer. Inside was a sketchbook. I gasped. It was mine, my childhood sketchbook. I had drawn dresses in it, Victorian silhouettes, old lacework fantasy bodices. I flipped through the pages. They were annotated. My grandfather had written next to each one, "Brilliant concept. Color needs adjustment, but the movement beautiful." She saw this pattern in Eleanor's quilt and made it her own. Tears blurred the ink. "He believed in you," she said. "They just didn't want you to believe it too." I wept. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because the hole in my chest that had ached for so many years finally had a name. It wasn't absence. It was erasure. My grandmother placed her hand over mine. "They can't lie their way out of this anymore." She stood, walked to the rotary phone, and with a calm fierceness I'd only seen once when she slapped a rattlesnake with a garden spade, she dialed. "Margaret, Charles, Isadora. I expect you at the ranch in 1 hour. Bring Lawson. We're opening the envelope." She hung up. The sun was setting behind the trees as I sat in that old wooden kitchen. Dust motes swirled in the golden light through the curtain. I knew what came next wasn't going to heal me. But for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission to speak. I was ready, to make them listen. They arrived as expected, late, irritated, and pretending not to be. My mother wore a long beige coat over a tailored navy dress, heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor as she walked into the living room like she owned the air itself. Her lips were pursed into a narrow line, as if the very scent of the place offended her. My father moved behind her, with the precision of a man used to weighing decisions against consequences. He barely looked at anything, just let his eyes skim over the furniture over me, like I was part of the decor. Isadora was last. She didn't speak. Arms folded, jaw clenched, she stood just inside the doorway, making it clear she didn't plan to stay long. Grandmother sat at the head of the table, her posture stiff, her hands resting on a folded handkerchief. On the table in front of her laid a sealed envelope, my grandfather's final card, in this long, orchestrated silence. Lawson stood near the fireplace, briefcase at his feet, expression neutral. I had always liked that about him. He never offered sympathy, only clarity. I stepped out from the kitchen into their view. A clatter of surprise rippled across the room. My mother froze mid-step, the hint of a practiced smile faltering. My father's eyes flicked away, settling on the wall behind me. Isadora's expression hardened, as if my presence had made the floor tilt beneath her. No one spoke. Grandmother broke the silence. "We're all here. Open it." Lawson took the envelope, carefully broke the seal, and unfolded the contents inside. The silence in the room was so absolute, I could hear the rustle of old paper, the faint whistle of wind against the windows. Theodore Hawthorne's final addendum to his will. Lawson began, per his explicit instruction to be read in the presence of the entire immediate family. He glanced at each of us, then read, "To my wife Eleanor, I leave the entire Hawthorne ranch and a personal trust to maintain the land and her independence." I turned slightly. Grandmother didn't react, not visibly. She just nodded once, as if she'd already known. To my granddaughter, Serafina Lawson continued, "I bequeath full ownership of the Hawthorne High Atelier, a property previously known as the Laurel Creek Warehouse. Over the past 5 years, it has been remodeled into a fully functional couture studio, complete with tools, materials, and archives. Additionally, all of my fashion sketches, textile research pattern books, and related intellectual property shall pass to her." My breath caught. To my granddaughters, Serafina and Isadora, I divide equally the remaining assets, cash holdings, agricultural shares, and securities. He paused, let the silence settle again. Then he handed me a separate envelope, a personal letter from your grandfather, for your eyes only. I took it with shaking fingers. The paper was thick, soft, and the handwriting unmistakable. My Serafina, you were always the one who listened closely, quietly, even when no one else did. The one who noticed patterns in silence and asked questions others were afraid to voice. You were not loud, but you were brave. I remember the day you cut a piece of your grandmother's old linen to make a dress for your doll. You were 7. Your mother scolded you, called it pointless. I kept that scrap. I still have it. They never saw your light because it didn't shine in a way they understood, but did. I saw you, every single version of you. This atelier is yours because your hands belong to thread, to form, to legacy. You may think you are alone, but you carry all of me. You are not a mistake. You are the future. And more than that, you are my pride. My hands trembled as I folded the letter back. Isadora shot up from her chair. You said I would get everything, she barked, turning on our parents. You told me if I stayed close to him, if I visited, smiled, played nice, I'd get it all. Her voice cracked shrill. My mother looked at her, then at me, lips drawn tight. My father said nothing. I stood slowly. You lied to him. You gave him a number that wasn't mine. You made sure I missed his funeral. You told him I didn't care. They didn't respond. They didn't have to. Their silence was enough. I looked at my sister. You didn't need to erase me to be loved. but you did it anyway. Grandmother stood. This family has existed on staged civility and carefully crafted narratives for too long, she said, voice cold. That ends now. She turned to them. Serafina is the legal heir to the atelier. Any attempt to interfere will be seen as a violation of Theodore's will. I suggest you leave. No one moved. Now. Isadora stormed out first, her heels striking the floor like war drums. My mother followed silent but rigid as if she'd been slapped. My father gave one last look, something unreadable, and walked out behind them. The front door closed behind them. No slam, just a quiet, final click. I stayed in the room long after everyone was gone. The envelope still lay open on the table, its seal broken, but its meaning whole. They had taken my name, my voice, my place. Now, I had it back, and they would not reclaim it. The atelier stood at the far edge of Laurel Creek Road behind a line of pine trees that had lost most of their needles. The old horse barn my grandfather once used had been transformed. Wide glass windows, high exposed beams, hanging lamps that bathed everything in warm light. Inside, antique sewing machines sat beside imported Italian fabric bolts. Mannequins stood in silent rows, some half draped in muslin, others bearing works in progress. I unlocked the front door for the first time and stepped into my own inheritance. My breath hitched when I spotted it on the main work table among neatly stacked design books was my childhood sketchbook. I picked it up with both hands. Inside were the same clumsy dresses I'd drawn in pencil, now accompanied by my grandfather's steady annotations. Consider lowering the waistline. Strong sense of movement. Pursue this. She sees something no one else sees. I pressed the pages to my chest. 2 days later, Lila arrived from New York, hair in a bun thread, scissors dangling from her backpack. Ezra came the day after. He walked in, carrying a garment bag, eyes scanning the room like he was measuring it in inches. We got to work. We didn't talk about the firestorm of gossip in town or the tension that clung to the ranch. We had a collection to build. We named it Victorian Resurrection. We gathered the lace my grandfather had stored, imported silk brocade metal boning from a different era. We designed gowns with layered skirts and intricate embroidery. We planned an opening showcase, modest but bold. A debut, not just for the collection, but for me. In the back of a pattern drafting book, I found a letter addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. It had never been mailed. He wrote about my mother, about how she'd begged him to sell the ranch years ago to fund a land deal Charles had nearly ruined, how he refused, how he knew that money would disappear. I protected it for you, Serafina, he wrote. They will come for it. Stand your ground. I folded the letter and placed it in the desk drawer next to my measuring tape. Memories started surfacing. I couldn't control them. When I was 15, I had a school fashion showcase. I'd worked for weeks. My mother had promised to attend. I remember waiting behind the curtain, holding my breath each time the auditorium door creaked. She never came. Isadora had a fundraiser that night, something with hors d'oeuvres and local donors. I never asked why she didn't come. I just stopped inviting her. Now I knew she had chosen where to be, and it was never with me. One evening, the power flickered. Ezra was checking the old fuse box when a sudden pop echoed. A spark. A thin line of smoke. Within seconds, flames spread across the storage shelves. We managed to put it out before the fire department arrived, but we lost 2 months' worth of work. 1/3 of Victorian Resurrection burned. I sat alone later that night, knees pulled to my chest, ashes still clinging to my clothes. In my hands was the sketchbook, its edges singed, the last few pages scorched. I stared at it like I could will it back to life. It wasn't the dresses that broke me. It was the feeling that I had failed him. When grandmother came by the next morning, she looked at the damage and sighed. Her voice was gentler, but what she said pierced deep. Maybe it's time to consider giving Isadora a stake in the atelier, just to settle things. I stood still. You mean invite her into the one thing she tried to steal? She's still your sister. And I'm still the one she erased. I walked past her, grabbed my coat, and left. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. I was building something from scratch, brick by emotional brick. And now, I knew if they wanted war, they had picked the wrong woman to silence. It started with a whisper. Then, a headline. 1 week after the fire, I noticed the shift. The barista at the cafe hesitated before handing me my coffee. A former client canceled a fabric consultation. Then, Lila forwarded me a link a local paper had published an article titled, "A Legacy Manipulated Questions Around the Hawthorne Atelier Inheritance." It was riddled with passive accusations, veiled comments, speculation that my grandfather may have been emotionally coerced during his final years. But what shook me most were the quotes from someone unnamed, clearly close to the family. The article read, "I'm not trying to reclaim the atelier. I just want justice for my grandfather." Those words were Isadora's. I knew them. I could hear her voice in every syllable. She had gone to the press anonymously leaking a version of the story, twisted just enough to sound reasonable. And it worked. By the end of the week, 2 of our key suppliers had pulled their contracts. They cited reputation management. A few former classmates from Parsons, who had once called me the one to watch, now left my messages unread. Even Lila, ever the optimist, had trouble hiding her concern. She stood beside me one evening, arms folded, jaw tight. "They're rewriting your story, Sarah. Right in front of you." Then came the email from Ezra. He'd been distant since the fire, quieter than usual. I opened his message with a pit in my stomach. "Sarah, I'm going to take a step back from the project for now. With the legal situation and public noise, I need to protect my own work and avoid getting entangled. I hope you understand. Ezra." I stared at his screen for minutes, then hours. I didn't reply. I barely slept that night. The next morning, Lila called me into the archive room. "You need to see this," she said. She handed me her phone. A video was playing grainy footage from 2 years ago. I was in the driveway of the ranch shouting. My grandfather stood near the porch frowning. I remembered that day we'd argued after he asked me to come home permanently. I'd said no. I'd wanted to find myself in New York first. But the video made it look like I had rejected him, left him in bitterness. It ended with me slamming the car door and driving off. The caption, "When love turns to entitlement." It spread quickly. On Bozeman's community forums, Facebook groups, even old high school acquaintances started posting cryptic comments. "She abandoned him. She doesn't deserve it. She only came back when the money was on the table." I stopped leaving the house. Lila, stubborn as ever, dug into the atelier's digital archives trying to find anything to counter the narrative. Then one night, I heard her gasp. She had found an old voicemail. It was dated the exact same day as the video. "Serafina, my girl." My grandfather's voice crackled through the speakers. "I'm sorry about today. I didn't mean to push. I know they've made things hard for you, but I want you to know I never doubted you. I never stopped hoping. You're not alone, no matter what they say." He paused. "You are my compass in this family of storms." I sat down, unable to speak. It was his voice, his words, proof that the story they tried to paint wasn't true. We backed up the file in 3 formats, printed a transcript, and called Lawson the next morning. I handed him not just the voicemail, but everything: letters, emails, handwritten notes, even the original copy of the design ledger where my grandfather had annotated my childhood sketches. He reviewed them in silence, then looked at me and said, "We go to court." This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about truth, about dignity, about every lie told in the shadows now being forced into the light. They wanted a quiet erasure, but I would make sure the world heard me speak. The courthouse in Bozeman had never seen this much press. People gathered outside with cameras, Inside the courtroom buzzed with whispers, folded arms, and sharp glances. I stood behind the heavy wooden doors, adjusting the neckline of my black dress. I'd sewn it myself, based on a sketch I drew when I was 8, one my grandfather had once called a vision of mourning and power. As I stepped into the courtroom, I caught sight of them. Isadora sat with her lawyer, whispering intensely. My mother stared straight ahead, spine stiff, her face unreadable. My father avoided looking at me altogether, choosing instead to scan the audience like he was auditing strangers. Lawson began our case with a quiet, confident tone. Then Isadora's team launched theirs. They claimed I'd manipulated a senile old man, that I'd wormed my way back into his life after years of distance. They produced emails, ones I had never seen. They showed the now infamous video clip. They even brought in our former housekeeper, who said vaguely, Mr. Hawthorne sometimes didn't seem clear-headed. I watched as my name was dragged, dissected, and made unrecognizable. Then, Lawson stood. He introduced the voicemail first, played it in full. The courtroom fell silent. When it ended, the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, he read from my grandfather's journal, a page dated just 3 weeks before his death. I leave the atelier to Serafina, not because she is the loudest, but because she is the truest. She has never tried to own this family, only to understand it. That is worth everything. He placed the journal on the evidence table. Then I took the stand. I spoke slowly, clearly. I didn't cry. I told the court about the missed calls, the redirected letters, the time I showed up at a wrong church for the funeral. I said, they didn't just isolate me. They rewrote me, turned me into someone I didn't recognize. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because truth matters, and no one should be erased from their own family story. A murmur rippled across the room. Outside, the press began publishing live updates. One reporter tweeted, "She spoke like someone who had carried silence too long." Isadora's team tried to counter. They asked for delay, claimed new evidence might surface, but the judge refused. The verdict was swift. The will was upheld. The court found no evidence of coercion or manipulation. Then came the final blow. It was discovered that my mother Margaret had requested adjustments to my grandfather's medical files, attempting to portray him as mentally unfit. The court issued sanctions, and the local board began an investigation. My father said nothing, just stood and left before the cameras could reach him. Isadora was last. Alone. No one walked with her. The fallout was fast. My parents lost several business partners. Isadora was removed from multiple community boards. The whispers that once trailed me now followed them. Bozeman had watched the trial like a performance. But for me, it was not spectacle. It was survival. That night, I walked back to the atelier. The windows glowed warm. Lila was inside adjusting a hemline. I stood outside for a moment, breathing in the cold air. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like the weight I had carried was finally not mine anymore. Inside that atelier was everything my grandfather had believed in. And now, I could finally believe in it too. I thought the trial was the end. I thought, after being exposed, they would slip away quietly, lick their wounds in silence. But people like them never leave in silence. A week after the verdict, a new article exploded across a regional publication called Western Legacy. The headline was surgical. Designer under fire, allegations of financial misconduct at Hawthorne Atelier. The article accused me of misappropriating my grandfather's funds, claiming I'd used them to launder money through inflated textile imports from Italy. I froze. The implications were criminal and devastating. I spent the next 48 hours combing through invoices, ledgers, contracts. Every euro accounted for, every delivery logged, every wire transfer tracked and cleared. Nothing was illegal. But the article had already been shared over 1,000 times. Clients paused orders again. Some partners ghosted me entirely. Lila, eyes bloodshot from working through the night, began tracing the digital trail. The draft version of the article, the one uploaded before final edits, contained metadata: IP address, device signature. We followed it. It led to the ranch, to the office computer once used by my mother. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just ambition or denial anymore. This was sabotage. I drove to the ranch the next morning, key still on my old ring. The house was quiet. I walked into the study where she once held her charity meetings. The drawers weren't locked. Inside, I found a draft communications plan, a budget for media relations, printed copies of the accusation emails, edited not sent from her address, but routed through fake aliases. I stood in that room holding the proof in my hands, and I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. That evening, I sent a message. I asked my mother, my father, and Isadora to meet me at the atelier. It was the first time since the court hearing that we would all be in the same room again. The design studio was lit with low amber light. Victorian sketches lined the walls. A single long table sat at the center, draped in linen. On it, I placed the documents. The truth in black and white. They arrived separately, my father with a flat face, Isadora guarded. My mother, smug at first, until Lila played the audio file. It was a voicemail my mother had sent to the journalist. Don't worry. I'll handle the narrative side. She won't know what hit her. The mask shattered. Margaret sat down slowly. Her voice trembled, then cracked. She admitted she orchestrated it all. Said she favored Isadora because she was pliable, easy to guide. That I reminded her too much of my grandfather, too strong, too opinionated, always questioning everything. She said she believed I was too soft for the world, that I'd never survive its harshness. Then, my father, silent for so long, finally spoke. Your mother was the one who decided to cut off contact. I agreed because I didn't want to fracture what little was left. He turned to Margaret. You didn't protect her. You tried to erase her. The room was quiet, except for Isadora's uneven breathing. She stood, blinking, fast eyes glassy. Then she bolted. I followed her down the hallway, calling her name. Outside the back door, she stopped. Her shoulders shook. When she turned to face me, she was crying, truly crying for the first time. They told me that if I obeyed, I'd be loved, she said. They promised me approval if I stayed in line. She looked at me. You didn't even have to try. They loved you anyway. That's why I hated you. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue. Later that night, I returned to my drafting table. I unrolled an old sketch. The lines were shaky, drawn by a hand still learning, but the idea was there. A girl in a velvet coat holding her own umbrella in the storm. I traced the lines again, this time with confidence. Not for approval, not for love, but because this was mine now, and no one could unwrite it. The atelier didn't just survive, it bloomed. After I published the evidence that cleared my name, independent journalists began their own investigations. Local designers and industry veterans came forward in support. A prominent textile historian even wrote a column defending the atelier's work and legacy. Orders returned. Not overnight, but steadily, meaningfully. A month later, Victorian Resurrection was reborn. We showcased the reconstructed collection at the American Heritage Fashion Showcase in Denver. The applause came before the models even finished their final walk. It wasn't just about the gowns anymore. It was the story behind every seam. A week after the show, I received a letter. Not an email. A letter from Isadora. The envelope was pale blue, her handwriting deliberate. I'm sorry for hurting you. Not because I hated you, but because I thought you didn't know what hurt felt like. I stared at those words for a long time. Instead of writing back, I invited her to one of my youth workshops. I taught local teens how to sketch, stitch, and dream on fabric. She arrived without makeup, no designer shoes. She wore a soft cotton blouse and flats. She sat beside a shy girl struggling to match lace with silk and helped her with the layering. Her voice was gentle. She didn't apologize again. But when the girl smiled at her, I saw a flicker of something real in her eyes. We weren't sisters again, not like when we were little. But we weren't enemies anymore. She left me a notebook the next day, a guide she wrote called Creative Presentation for the Quiet Ones. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. My relationship with grandmother Eleanor also changed. We drank tea on the back porch on Sundays. She told me how grandfather planted a white pine in the yard to mark their engagement, how he cried when he finished building Atelier's first dress form. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt foundational. A few weeks later, I received another letter, this one with no return address. Inside was a check, a large one, enough to expand the atelier to Paris or Milan, enough to dream bigger. Along with it was a single swatch of brocade, the exact pattern I had chosen when I was 7 years old, the one grandfather had saved in a tin box labeled Serafina's Start. I didn't know who sent it, but somehow I felt he had a hand in it. That night, I sat beneath the white pine. The stars above shimmered like the glow-in-the-dark stickers he used to paste on my ceiling. I opened my sketchbook, drew a new design, and whispered, "Grandpa, I'm writing my own part now. No curtain call, just a new scene. And this time, I'm center stage." Sometimes, it's not about what we inherit, but what we reclaim truth voice and the quiet dignity of standing tall when others tried to make us disappear. Some wounds never fully heal, but they teach us how to rise without asking for permission. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if you believe in stories that fight for light, subscribe, follow, or simply say, "You're here." Thank you for listening.